Darkness Radio. I'm Dave. That's Tim. And tonight, Tim, we're going to take a unique look at the biblical God. We'll do that a little later on in the show.
All right.
Our guest, Reverend John Marcus Polk, will talk about the biblical God. Is he an alien? We'll discuss some of those topics, plus his new book, Blue Beings, Visitation at the UFO Conference. We'll do that a little later on in the show. Kicking off the show, though, Diana Michael will join us. She's the author of Promise of Angels, a miraculous true story of hope, making light of the spiritual journey. She's a local Minnesotan. I wish I would have realized that a little sooner. We should have just had her live in studio, Tim.
Yeah, I could have gave her a lift in.
That's right.
Yeah, and not to be creepy right now.
No, that's creepy.
Yeah,
just knock it off, Tim.
okay,
Stop freaking out the guests up front.
A little bit.
Hey, just so you know, if you're brand new to this and haven't been listening for the last couple of weeks, we've got more Darkness Radio than we even know what to do with at this point. We're on Monday through Friday. No more football to interrupt us.
No.
So we'll be on Monday through Friday. We'll be on from 9 p.m. to the midnight hour, Tim.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty good. And as if that's not enough, this Saturday I'm hosting Coast to Coast AM.
Wow.
It's a prediction show. We're going to hear predictions for what we can expect of 2017. And what I'm hearing in the news sounds like it could be a kind of a creepy 2017.
Yeah, a little bit.
Imposing sanctions on Russia.
Yeah.
Russia promising retaliation.
Yeah.
So we'll see what our astronomer and our numerologist have to say about that.
Might be a short 2017.
Yeah, I hope not. I got plans for later in the year. Then that's going on. And then Monday, again, we come back live with Darkness Radio, but you also get Beyond the Darkness, a brand new 1-hour extension of the best in paranormal talk radio. Each week, we will explore a different faction of the supernatural and the paranormal. We'll dig deeper. We'll get some interesting newer stories that have not been heard on Darkness Radio. And we've got Theater of the Mind, where we take your encounters and Tim brings them to life.
I did through interpretive dance.
Well, that too,
yeah.
But you don't get to see that part of it. But
No.
That's part of the show. And if you have not subscribed yet, please go sign up at podcast1.com. That's podcast1.com, or go over to iTunes, where you can sign up for the series there, and subscribe for Darkness Radio as well while you're over there, because we're available at both, Tim. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No,
It's true.
Really?
Yeah, both of them are going to be there. Now, the first 2 weeks, we explored different aspects of the Black-Eyed Kid encounters. Coming up this Monday, we've got, check this out, Tim, Sinister Intentions, Invasion of Shadow People, on January 2nd with Rosemary Ellen Guiley, and it'll be her birthday.
Really?
Yeah, and this is cool. She's she's going to be a guest on our third show, just like she was a guest on our third show 11 years ago on Darkness Radio.
Comes in threes.
There you go. Yeah. So we've got that. And then the week after, Killer Encounters, Sasquatch, Dark Forces in Nature. And then we're going to be doing a show after that, episode number 5, Tim, on Slender Man. From internet meme to method of murder. That's what we're going to discuss. We've got a lot of cool stuff popping, a lot of great stuff going on, and we'd love for you to be a part of it. So go subscribe to Beyond the Darkness on podcast1.com. We're part of the Jericho Network. Or you can subscribe to it right on iTunes. Not YouTunes.
No, not on YouTunes.
No, not on
no.
YouTube. We should open up YouTunes.
Yeah.
iTunes, you can find it over there, Beyond the Darkness. And do us a favor, if you are a subscriber on iTunes, make sure to review and rate us, because that just helps spread the word and get more of the show out there. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, Diana Michael, our guest here on Darkness Radio. Miraculous true story of hope and making light of the spiritual journey. Thank you for joining us, Diana.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Right down the road from us here over in St. Louis Park to Coon Rapids. I would have loved to have had you in. We'll have to do that again sometime in the future.
I love that.
Talk to us a little bit about your story. Give us a little background on you. You're an author. You're a healer. When you say a healer, what does that mean to you?
Well, I can tell you more about that later, but I actually studied with Echo Bodine, who's a famous local healer. I think she's been on your show. This was in the 80s. Someone told me in my 20s that I had healing in my hands, and I didn't know what that meant. And then years later, I had my first energy work. I had a reflexology treatment with Steve Sonmore. And I could feel the energy moving through my body, so I knew that was real. It wasn't just, it really worked. And I was interested in it. And that time I found Echo's book on Hands That Heal, and I went to her class, and she had a healing circle in her home. This was before she was famous. And we all practiced on each other. And when that happened, I started to work with friends and family. I had a close friend who had severe migraines, like for 4 days, where she had to be in a dark room and couldn't handle light or sound. And the headaches would disappear in like 15 or 20 minutes with the healing. And that's when I knew it wasn't me, that I was just, I think of myself as the jumper cable. The energy just came through me and relieved her pain. And it was so powerful and such a great gift of nature that I knew that I was meant to do healing. And then a year later, I was actually getting a healing from Echo. And it was September. She had birthday cards all over the mantle. And I asked her when her birthday was. She said September 20th. Well, that was my birthday. And after we talked, I learned we were born the same year, the same day, in the same hospital, an hour apart.
Wow.
And so 40 years later, I ended up in her class. So it was one of those synchronistic moments where you knew everything that happened before that got you to that moment. And I for 30 years, I've worked with cancer patients. I worked at Pathways. Most of my healing has been volunteer, and I'm a cancer survivor, so I did start working at the Virginia Piper Cancer Institute, and that's in the last 5 years.
Now, when you say that you're a cancer survivor, did you use healing on it, or did you use medical assistance that most people would go through?
Actually, I had surgery, but I did not do radiation, chemotherapy, or hormone therapy as my doctor wanted me to do. And I wouldn't recommend that to anybody else, but at that time in my life, that was the right decision for me. And I did get healing from a woman named Beth Bauer, who was also in St. Louis Park. No, I guess she's in Apple Valley now, but she's a local healer. And I had got healing from her instead of the radiation, and I'm 6 years cancer-free. It wasn't in the margins, and it hadn't spread at all, so that was another reason for my decision. And my mother was damaged by radiation in the 40s when they didn't have any regulations, and so from the time I was a young child, I was really brainwashed never to do that, so that for me personally, I couldn't do that choice, and it's worked out for me. So that's
amazing. When you're doing a healing on someone, and you say it's not really coming from you, you're working more as a conduit for this energy. Does it leave you energized and refreshed as well while you're working on someone, or does it drain you to do that kind of work?
Well, when I do healing, I receive a healing, so I feel peaceful and inspired and energized when I do a healing. I've never had an instance where I take on anything that the person is carrying, and it just it's a wonderful thing, and I love doing it. So, I mean, if I did, I've heard of other people saying that they might pick up a headache from someone and things like that, but I wouldn't do it if it wasn't fun. So, but.
All right, very cool. Now let's talk a little bit about this book, Promise of Angels. What made you decide to get this book and put it together?
Okay, this is my second published book, but it starts out with I had a near-death experience when I was 16. I was raped. And after the rape, I was also raised strict Catholic, and my mother was a really religious zealot. I was taught that it's better to be killed than lose your virginity. So after the rape, I believed I lost my soul, and I became suicidal. And I did try suicide many times, but this one particular time was when I can't prove that I died, but I believe that I died, because I was unconscious for like 6 weeks, and shortly after I took the overdose, I was taken out of my body, and I found myself in an ethereal conference room, and I was surrounded by spirits at this conference room, and they were angels, ancestors, and they just emanated pure love. I mean, divine love. I just didn't want to go back. They didn't say anything. They communicated telepathically. And then all of a sudden, a white sheet of paper floated down from the ceiling, landed on the table, and it had nothing on it. And then all of a sudden, the word truth, Truth, slowly printed out on the paper. Then these two giant angels, I believe they were archangels, brought me back and said, "We'll protect you. We want you to tell the truth." Now, that was 50 years ago. I did not know what truth they wanted me to tell or who or what they would protect me from. But then as my life went on and got a lot worse, something had changed. I wasn't suicidal anymore, and I was obsessed with writing. I just started writing a journal, and that helped keep me alive because I was a pretty messed up teenager. And then I had a lot of miraculous things start happening. And the second time...
Well, now you say a lot of miraculous things, just kind of like I say, oh, yeah, and I stopped at the grocery store to pick up some bread on the way home. It's very nonchalant. What do you consider miraculous things, and what occurred in your lifetime?
Well, this was another connection similar to the synchronicity of meeting Echo. Before that other suicide attempt, shortly after the rape, this was in the 1960s, I was taking a bottle of barbiturates. My mother was chronically ill and a recluse, and I stole some of her pills, and I was starting to take them, and I was gagging, and I turned on the TV to watch TV to distract me. And at that time, I always watched Steve Allen, who was the founder of The Tonight Show, famous comedian, and he
Certainly,
was on.
yeah, we know who he is.
Yeah, he jumped into a vat of Jell-O, and I started laughing, and I got involved in the show, and I ended up falling asleep, and I didn't die that night. Then my father bought me his autobiography. He was probably in his 40s then, and I was 16. In that autobiography, which I read in a weekend, was a poem he wrote when he was 17 in Hyde Park, Chicago, and he was suicidal. And he also questioned the contradictions of religion. He was asthmatic, which I was, and then he was raised Catholic. And he had an absent mother. She was in vaudeville and never there, and he was raised by alcoholic aunts. And my mother was absent because she was chronically ill and bedridden. So all these things that he had, and he had become this famous, wonderful person, and he had felt the things I was feeling right then. That poem reached through time like 28 years and touched this girl in St. Paul who didn't want to live. And I wrote him a letter, and he wrote me back, and we corresponded for over 30 years. So that was the other thing that made me want to always be a writer and write a book, because that book really turned me around and gave me hope.
That's great. Boy, and I had a similar situation with music, with Springsteen growing up, so I can totally relate to somebody reaching through an entertainment vein in order to get their story heard to you, and that really turned my life around and changed it. So I totally respect what you went through dealing with that. Having your life open up to these miracles and seeing these big changes take place in you, does it affect the way you look at life and death now?
Yes. Well, the thing that really made the difference was I went on a spiritual search because I was brought up to believe that we're here to suffer. And from the time I remember at 6 or 7 years old, feeling guilty if I was happy, because I thought suffering was the way to heaven. And until I could change that belief, I attracted suffering to me. So my early life was pretty horrendous. And some of the things I believe the angels, I know they protected me from. I ended up dating a man, got pregnant by him, and he dumped me. And then I moved into Central Manor. This is in the book, but it's a there used to be a convent, and it was a boarding house downtown.
Mm-hmm.
And there I had an experience with a spirit. I met a spiritualist girl there, and we did a seance, and this spirit had a message for me. Well, it turned out that it was the spirit of a nun who had lived in and died in the chapel, and she was still haunting the place, and she was trying to protect me. And I found out the exact space of the room I lived in. There were 3 steps outside in the hallway, was the exact space of the chapel that the nuns used to go to Mass at. And I used to see these flickering lights in the corner. And then I later found out from the spiritualist minister that was the place where for years and years they lit the votive candles. The nuns lit the votive candles. But in this message in the seance, they said, it went really fast, and we couldn't quite make out ski, kill, that's all we could make out. And we thought, we didn't know what it meant, so we just forgot about it. Well, a few weeks later, a girl was killed on Duluth Playground in St. Paul, on the playground where I had made love to Robert, this man that I got pregnant by. And anyway, it turned out that was I was scared. I didn't know what was going on, and I found out anyway. He was arrested for the murder, and why didn't he kill me? I had this survival guilt. Why didn't he kill me when I had just tried to kill myself? And Susan Merrick didn't live, so he was actually arrested. And then I also realized I'd been protected by the angels, because there was one point when I told him I was pregnant, he took me to a really far away place out in this nature reserve, and in retrospect, I think maybe he was going to kill me. So that was one of the times that I know that my life was saved. And
wow, that's got to really affect you. I mean, that's unbelievable to know that you may have narrowly escaped murder yourself.
And then the thing is that the spiritualist minister I met, she was a woman. Well, in the Catholic Church, a woman cannot be a priest, but she inspired me. She became a surrogate mother to me, and she helped me change my beliefs and believe in a loving God, and that God wants us to have joy, and there was none of the shame or the guilt. So for me, that felt like a better fit. And when I changed my beliefs, then I started to attract wonderful things into my life, and everything started to change. So changing that belief was really crucial to change my life, and where I didn't make bad choices.
Very cool. Now, you've collected quite a few different experiences that we're going to chat about, and I know I want to hear about these kind of different miracles, these kind of life-changing deals and ghosts that you've come up against and things that have happened. And when you're doing a healing, I'm just curious, do you ever find that there are spirits attached to that person and that they're not really sick? It's more the spirit that's connected to them that's making them sick?
Well, I'm not real psychic, so I'm not able to always differentiate that. I do believe in spirit attachments, and if I'm sensing something like that, I'll usually advise that they go to someone who is more of an expert about that. But I definitely do think that definitely happens to people.
All right, we'll take a break. We'll come back. We've got more coming on Darkness Radio this evening. Diana and Michael will be here with us for the remainder of this half hour. Then Reverend John Marcus Polk will join us. He's the author of Blue Beings, Visitations at the UFO Conference, and he's also the author of Yahweh, The Biblical God is an Alien. We'll discuss those topics and get your thoughts on it as well. You can always email me, Dave, at darknessradio.com during the show. If you'd like to weigh in and have some thoughts or questions for our guests, feel free to do that. We'll be back with more right after this. Now, when you had your near-death experience, when you were rescued by the angels, they made you a promise. And can you tell us, expand upon that a little bit? What was the promise of the angels?
They just promised to protect me, and I didn't know what that meant, probably more from myself than anything. But I wanted to get back, one thing I forgot to say about that murder, the message that we were getting, and when we did that seance, we were not that psychic, so we couldn't figure it out. We kept getting ski, kill, kill. Well, the murderer's name was Robert Petrashevsky. So when we figured it out later that was probably, the nun was probably trying to warn me. And at one point, he tried to reconnect with me, and when I was at home and my dad hung up on him, told him never to call back again. And if it had been me, I probably would have met up with him again, and it might have been me that was killed. But the other thing that they protected me from, well, I had several things happen during these teen years. I had my first boyfriend named Michael was sent to Vietnam, and I was very depressed. And I was writing. Steve Allen was advising that I get counseling, so I went to a counselor, and the counselor put me on heavy doses of Thorazine, which is an antipsychotic drug. Well, I was very allergic to it, so I became catatonic. I mean, I was literally, I did the Thorazine shuffle. I couldn't think, I couldn't talk. And then I was locked in the psych ward, and when my father's insurance money ran out, I was sent to a nursing home to live in the basement and work for room and board. Now, for some reason, I stopped taking the meds. Luckily, they weren't monitoring me, and I hid them in my suitcase. And I became lucid, and I eventually escaped. But if I hadn't listened to my intuition and done that, I might still be there. And that was, and then after that, that was when I ended up taking the overdose. I went drinking with a bunch of girlfriends, and I took 55 Thorazine.
Wow.
And that is tripled, that antipsychotic is tripled. There's a triple effect on that if you're drinking. And that's when I had the near-death experience. So I believe, I can't prove that I died. I mean, I lost 6 weeks. I didn't remember anything for a while until I was back home 6 weeks later, and nobody would even really talk about it. But that was one experience. But then after that, I really wasn't sure if I had a problem. You know, I was still depressed. I couldn't go home because of having been pregnant. My parents didn't want me there. So I ended up marrying a guy I met at Mickey's Diner. I knew him for 3 weeks. And long story short, I had a child by him, and then when I grew up in the marriage and left him, I went through 2 years of severe domestic abuse, including shooting. He set fire to my dad's house, and he shot, when my son and I were in a high-rise apartment, he shot with a high-powered rifle into the apartment building. And that's part of the book. But anyway, there were many things that I went through, and I believe it was the angels that got me through and my new beliefs. And I started doing TM. Transcendental meditation was big because of the Beatles, and my brothers were the first teachers of Team M in Minnesota. So that really helped me because I was really alone when I went into meditation. It really helped me to not be so afraid.
If the angels were protecting you so much, why did they keep putting you in the paths, or why didn't, I should say, maybe they didn't put you there, but why didn't they deflect you from the paths of these people that were so not good? You would think that if there was a protection going on, you wouldn't have had to deal with most of the stuff. You wouldn't have even encountered most of these people.
Well, I think at that time in my life it was my own beliefs. I believed maybe I was crazy. I believed that I didn't deserve to be happy, and I think your thoughts attract things to you, and I hadn't changed my beliefs enough to really come out of that where I was like a magnet. I was attracting these negative things. So it was really changing those beliefs, and then I started to have a wonderful life after that happened. I mean, I had Steve Allen in my life writing me. That was a miracle. And then eventually I did finally get to when I got divorced, my husband tried to take my son from me, and he went back and used that misdiagnosis that I had in my earlier life. Well, we all had psychiatric evaluations, and I was told that I never was mentally ill, that it was, I was allergic to the drug, and that I was a good mother. And then I found out that he was a sociopath, and he had been in prison for 15 years when he was younger and had committed arson before. And
wow.
So it turned out I got my son back, and he ended up getting a young girlfriend and moving to Texas. I never got child support, but that was finally over. And then I was also told by psychics, which I really hate it when psychics get a bad rap, because they gave me great hope. I was lucky that I met psychics that were compassionate, and Eve Olson, the spiritualist minister that I studied with, she told me that I was going to have a wonderful husband and a wonderful life. And when I had no vision of my future, I couldn't see getting past the past. And then just actually before my mother died, I found out that she had been a nun. She told me, like a few weeks before she died, that she had a picture of herself with these nuns, and I said, which nun was Sister Mary Lucy? Because I had found she had a lot of missals with this name in, and she said that was me. And, well, I didn't know this. She'd been a nun for 7 years in Ladysmith, Wisconsin, in a nursing order. And she kept it a secret because of the shame of having to leave the convent. Well, when I understood that, I could finally understand why she taught me such extreme beliefs, and I could forgive her and forgive myself. So that was another catalyst for the good things that started to come in.
And when you were having this kind of turnaround in your life, were you getting any messages from the angels? I mean, did you get it telepathically, in dream form, anything to kind of let you know, we're here with you, we're watching you, we've got your back?
I think it was mostly in the form of synchronicity, and some of the psychic things were coming true, and also I was seeing miraculous healings too when I started to get into healing. And even before that, there was a psychic palmist named David. Way back, he was just a gorgeous man, and all the women flocked to him to get their palms read. And I went to him with my sister, and he told my sister that she needed to immediately go to the doctor and that something was seriously wrong. Well, she was bleeding profusely, but she assumed it was her menses, which was commonly heavy for her. Well, she went to the doctor, and she was hemorrhaging from an IUD. And that very week on the news, they said that women were dying and becoming sterile from this faulty IUD. So she had to go in and get that removed, and she went on to have 2 beautiful daughters. But, I mean, people make fun of psychics, but I've seen more times than once where it's a spiritual gift, and they save lives, and they can enhance your life. So I know some people think it's at best entertainment, but I think I later on I studied with Reverend Fuller and learned about the gifts of the Spirit, and they're in the Bible. And being psychic and healing are 2 of the gifts that I really witnessed helping people.
Great. Let's take our final break this hour. We'll be back with more Darkness Radio right after this. With the book, you've got how many books out total now, Diana?
Well, this is the second book. I published essays and articles and poetry, but this is the second book that I had published. And another thing that got me started to writing this book. My first book I actually got a true-story movie offer, and Steve Allen wrote the foreword, and I ended up, the publisher requested too much money from the film producer, and I ended up losing the rights. So I kept writing, but I I was afraid of what might happen again. But then 6 years ago, when I was doing healing, a friend of mine named Penny, who was in late stages of breast cancer, at the same time when I got diagnosed with cancer, she always encouraged my writing and said, "You have to write another book." Well, I was writing books. I have 6 manuscripts, but I wasn't trying to get them published after what had happened to me. So then a year after she passed away, I went to a psychic named Gina Booth, and she's a young local psychic, and she studied with Echo, and she's very gifted. Well, I went to her because I was having my first mammogram after cancer, and I was scared, and I was hoping maybe she'd see something to encourage me because I didn't want to go. I wasn't there to ask about anything. And then at the end of the reading, she said, "There's a woman that's been hanging around bugging me, and I don't know what it means, but she's holding this stack of papers." Well, I knew right away that it was Penny because she'd always encouraged my writing, and she was encouraging me. She said she wanted me to get going on writing a book, and I thought, well, I don't know if anybody else cares about these things, but I really wanted to help other people and give hope to other people, and actually hope someone else might find that if you wait long enough, miracles will come into your life too, so that it might spare a life the way mine was spared. So she's the one who really got me going on trying again, and I wanted to keep a promise to her to write another book, and that was really and the book is written in letters to Penny, because I know she was listening on the other side. So,
what do you hope people get from the book? What do you hope their takeaway is?
Well, I really hope that they know that they're protected by angels. I don't think I'm a special person. I think that everybody's protected by angels. Anybody who almost dies, and I think, actually, I believe 90% of the time you don't remember. And most of the time when we're protected, we've been able to avoid a catastrophe and we don't even know it. I think angels operate most of the time silently, and we don't know how many times we've been saved. So I want them to know that they do have angels, and you can call on them. We have free will, so they'll interact with you much more if you call on them. I think the archangels come when it's a matter of life and death, and I think we have a contract with our body, and there's times when I didn't want to come back. People have been embraced by the light. Well, I was goosed by the light. I did not want to come back. But I think that there's a time when our contract is up, and mine wasn't up yet. But I am hoping that people get hope from this. And also the difference in this book, too, I think, is the sense of humor. I wrote it with a sense of humor. I'm kind of to give tribute to Steve Allen. I also became friends with his wife, too, when he passed, and was friends with her until she passed away about a year ago. So.
Wow, that's pretty powerful. When you're looking back now at your life and the things that have gone on with it, how did you find it most powerful to call out to the angels? What was the most effective method to you?
For asking the angels for help?
Mm-hmm.
I just think it's talking to them like you do your best friend. It isn't about a specific prayer. Like, now, as a child, I had to learn these rote prayers, and it was really difficult for me. I had to learn to pray all over again. I had trouble believing. My mom was chronically ill, and I prayed for God to heal her, and she didn't get healed, and I had trouble with that. But I also realized she believed she wouldn't get to heaven without suffering, so she couldn't be healed because she thought that she had to suffer. And so I think you just talk to God and the angels the way you would your best friend.
And will they reveal themselves to you if you do that, or do they just work silently behind the scenes?
I think that they'll reveal themselves to you in synchronicity by guiding you to the people that will help you. Like with Steve Allen or Echo, meeting her 40 years after we were in incubators next to each other. How could that have happened randomly that there was some divine guidance for that to happen. It was too miraculous to not have there been divine guidance behind that. And because I'm not a psychic, I'm an average person. I wish I was psychic. Like Echo, she sees the angels. If you could see the angels, I can sense angels and guides working through me when I'm doing healing. But if I could see them, that would be so tremendous. And
well, have you asked them why they haven't made themselves known to you like that?
Well, I'm not sure. I think it's maybe just because I think humility and patience is couple of the lessons I've had to learn in this life, and also for people to identify with me. I even with my first book, I'm just sharing what happened to me, and I find when you do that, when you show when you've been vulnerable, people open up to you. I have women tell me about when they were raped and domestic abuse and incest and things that there's other things in the book that I didn't even get into. They share that with me and unburden and share things with me that they never would tell anyone else. So I'm hoping my book will allow them to open up and also writing. I think writing saved my life too. If I hadn't been writing at the times I had no one to talk to, I don't know what would have happened, especially when I was really a teenager and had such strong emotions.
Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us this evening, Diana. We appreciate you sharing your story.
Well, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.
Certainly. We'll look forward to speaking to you again in the future. And we'll have links up to our guest and her book and website. If you go to darknessradio.com and click on the guests tab, you'll find all the guests there. If you click on the True Crime Tuesday tab, you'll find all the information there regarding our True Crime Tuesday guests. And we've made it even easier to find us now. If you go to darknessradio.com, we have got everything all together on one page. You can click on Beyond the Darkness, and it'll take you to the page to sign up for the podcast Beyond the Darkness, the new 1-hour extension to the best in paranormal talk radio. You might have downloaded the first episode. We've got a new Black Eyed Kids episode where we investigated as a possible connection to aliens. So you can go check that out. Shadow People on docket next, attacks from Bigfoot after that, and a look at Slender Man, from internet memes to ways of murder. We'll talk about that as the weeks progress on the show. So go sign up, subscribe now. It's fun, it's easy, it's free, it's so simple. Anybody can do it. Even Tim, who's terrified of the internet because of AI maybe watching him.
They're going to take over.
You'll also find a link to The Dark Zone, another property that I'm a part of, The Dark Zone. And click on any of the links there. You'll be able to follow all of our different little connections and all of the cool stuff that we're doing in the field of the paranormal. All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we've got Reverend John Marcus Polk joining us here to discuss blue beings visitation at the UFO conference and Yahweh, the biblical God, is an alien. That's next on the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Dave Schrader, along with me, Tim Dennis. And for the next 2 hours, we're going to spend time with our guest, Reverend John Marcus Polk. He was born in 1969 in Raleigh, North Carolina. He holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in broadcasting and another Bachelor of Arts degree in metaphysics from the University of Sedona. This university granted John the title of International Metaphysical Minister after his studies were completed. John is also a Reiki master and an instruction of, is this Usui Reiki, Reverend Polk? Is that how you say it?
Usui.
Usui. Very cool. What is Usui Reiki?
I'm sorry. What did you just say?
What is Usui Reiki?
Okay, Macau Usui, close to, I think, 70 years ago, went on a pilgrimage to the mountains in Tibet, and he happened upon this being that dwelled in a cave, and over a 21-day period, this perhaps even extraterrestrial being taught him this ancient Tibetan Buddhist healing modality, which is better known as Reiki. And there's a couple different modalities within the modality, but the particular brand and or version of Reiki that I'm trained in as a master and instructor is called Usui Reiki. And and it's hands-on healing, remote healing. Reiki actually breaks down into Rei, R-E-I, stands for universal spirit, and then Ki stands for energy. So universal spirit energy. And basically the Reiki master is not the healer, is the instrument for the healing energy to pass through them into the subject that you're trying to heal.
Very fascinating. What got you involved in this type of work and background to study metaphysics and try to understand what's going on?
That's a good question. Most of us, not all of us, but most of us were brought up in church, and, the fundamental belief system of church is, you do this, you do that, or you burn in hell for all eternity. And, the more I learned about the Bible, the more I realized that it's just, it's a tool for brainwashing and control and programming. But I do believe in God. I just don't believe that God in the Bible is actually God. I believe he's an extraterrestrial. And so I started investigating how I could become an ordained minister in a thought model, if you will, ideology of God that was not based on the Bible. And I discovered metaphysics through the University of Sedona. And so I got a bachelor's in metaphysics. And then I decided to go for my ministry. And so I did both at the University of Sedona, and it served me very well in my life so far.
The idea that you believe God is alien, do you believe that he is interplanetary alien, or is he more of an interdimensional being, or just a universal energy? What is your belief system?
Good question. The universal energy is what I believe that God is. God in the Bible, I believe, is an interplanetary, interdimensional, extraterrestrial, and more specifically, Enlil of the Anunnaki.
And again, what drove you down that pathway that you believe that this was what we're dealing with and not the conventional method that many of us have been brought up to believe in different theologic backgrounds?
Studying Eric von Daniken, Zecharia Sitchin, watching the show Ancient Aliens on History Channel, and I tell you what, it took me years for that to soak in. It took me years to be able to separate the two. And, but Eric von Daniken, he puts it better than anybody I've ever heard. And when you study it, the more you study it, it's hard to deny that he's wrong. But every culture in human history has a god or a pantheon of gods that descended from the skies in fiery chariots and either created man and or interbred with man by tampering with our DNA and created civilization. And these stories you can find from Easter Island out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean to Hawaii out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, all the way out to Indonesia, all the way to South America, even the Aleutian Islands in northern Alaska, to the Norse gods in Scandinavia, to the Greek gods in Greece, the Roman gods that basically worship the Greek gods, to Egypt, those pantheon of gods. I can keep going on and on and on and tell you the name of their deities, but they all have similar stories, but with the same basic premise. The gods descended from the skies in fiery chariots and descended upon the earth. And so the more you think about it, every culture in human history has a similar story. And each one of these gods basically comes down to the earth and lies and tells the indigenous that they are in fact the grand architects of the universe, knowing very well that there is only one grand architect of the universe, and that is what I like to call, and what you learn in metaphysics, the universal God consciousness.
Let's take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll continue to flesh out these concepts as we go on deeper into the darkness on the edge of town. Let's start digging into this. Your first book was Yahweh, the Biblical God is an Alien. Talk to us about what you wanted to convey through that book. What was your hopes in bringing that out and sharing that with the readers of the world?
Well, it goes back to what we were just talking about. It goes back to ancient alien astronaut theory, that in fact God represented in the Bible is definitely not God. He's and extraterrestrial. And it's such an easy topic to argue with ordained ministers and theologians about. You just use the scriptures against them. They do not acknowledge the Old Testament, and the Old Testament is riddled with scripture after scripture after scripture that if you add it up, it really makes no sense. But if you switch a few keywords around, such as God and archangels, you switch those around and say extraterrestrial, then it does start to make sense. For example, Genesis 6, the sons of the gods descended to earth and mated with the daughters of men. Well, the sons of the god literally translates into the fallen angels. So how can angels have sex? Well, they can't have sex unless, of course, they're flesh and blood beings. And that's what they were. And then they came down to earth, found the indigenous human women attractive, knew that they could take advantage of them quite easily, and enjoyed fornicating with them, and created a whole new race called the Nephilim. And there's just so many scriptures. It just amazes me how churches today ignore the Old Testament. If anything, they try and deliberately stay away from it. And to me, that's a travesty. And I bring out a lot of these points in my book.
Have you had religious leaders debate you on the subject with their aspect of I mean, again, it's kind of broad stroke to say, if you replace one word with another, it takes on a totally different meaning. Well, that could be said in every aspect of our life. Just because you can swap out alien and God, does it make it true? I mean, that's open to the interpretation, which is kind of what you bucked against to begin with anyway, was taking the interpretation of man, which the Bible is, and making it fit whatever parameter they were trying to teach. What makes Reverend John Polk's version of the Bible any more or less believable than what Catholic, Lutheran, Presbyterian, Methodist, and everybody else is out there pitching?
Well, I don't have my own version of the Bible.
Right.
I just point out idiosyncratic kind of things that are argued for the Bible that really just don't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, we can go there for like days over the scriptures. One thing I like to do is I like to say, well, do you believe that God loves us all equally? And, theologians and the preachers will say, well, of course. I said, then how come he flooded the earth and killed everybody? And then I'll go, this is hypersensitive. Are all homosexuals going to burn in hell for all eternity? They don't like to answer that question. They don't even like to touch it. In Corinthians and in multiple passages throughout the Bible, it speaks of homosexuals burning in hell for all eternity. I don't believe that. I don't believe that at all. There's so many examples of where the Bible, it just doesn't make sense. A loving, benevolent God that loves us all equally. I grew up rich. My parents had a lot of money. I grew up in a $1 million condo on the ocean in Daytona. One of my good friends, his father died when he was 5 years old. He didn't have a really good upbringing, ended up becoming, a drug dealer and went to prison. Now, I could have easily been that next soul in line that inherited that kind of life, but I didn't, and so reincarnation is not a Christian belief either, and neither is karma. So these are all basic tenets in my philosophy that are not actually tenets in Christianity, and these things need to be reexamined and talked about more and more.
All right. Well, the idea that God is this alien, then is it an alien or is it an alien race?
It's actually both. Like in my, based on my research and what I've been discovering for many, many years now, is that Enlil is portrayed as Yahweh, Jehovah in the Old Testament of the Bible. And that most biblical figures and patriarchs and archangels are, in fact, his minions, if you will. that are there to serve his purpose, to propagate and perpetuate his message. And for the most part, and not just in the Bible, I don't want to single out the Bible because really it's all religion, but in all of these religions, these pantheon of gods, gods plural, the gods descended to the earth and made it with the, gods is plural. So now there's more than one God. Well, in effect that there is, if you consider that the gods are extraterrestrials. These are actually minions of Enlil. And the fallen angels were basically Anunnaki that didn't want to follow him anymore. They wanted to follow Shemyaza El Satan, also known as Asmodeus, Asmodeus, and Beelzebub, also known as Lucifer. And what Lucifer actually literally translates into is the bearer of the light. So they wanted to follow Lucifer instead of God or Enlil. And so he kicked him off of his mothership and descended upon Mount Hermon, which is interesting because on the exact opposite side of the earth, on the same line of latitude, is Roswell, New Mexico. So I don't think that was an accident where, these ETs are actually coming down to our planet.
All right. And I'm just trying to wrap my head around a lot of these concepts as well. But if there is a God, where did that alien come from? What put him in power that he was able to create and, start life here, or, whatever, however you want to put it out there? I mean, where did he come from? What's his backstory?
He came from Nibiru, and every 3,600 years, Nibiru is in an elliptical orbit and comes into our part of the solar system. So many, many millions of years, they colonized Orion. They colonized the Pleiades. They colonized the Sirius star cluster and star system. They colonized Cygnus and a great deal of our portion of the Milky Way galaxy. And then from there, they started to colonize our particular solar system within the Milky Way galaxy. And what they were doing on Earth is not special or unique or exclusive to Earth. They've been doing this human creation story or creation of beings all around the Milky Way, Andromeda, our neighboring galaxy, and different parts of the universe and even the omniverse. And this has been going on for millions of years. So what they've done on Earth, this kind of...
So is he just like a general leader from Nibiru that this was his sector that he was given to be in charge of?
Yeah, pretty much. His father anointed him leader of our planet, his father Anu.
And now where are you getting that information from?
It's in all of the literature.
In all of what literature?
Anunnaki literature. More specifically, Zechariah Sitchin, but not so much all of his work, but Dr. Sasha and Janet Lesson, who I work with a lot. I work with them closely. They've authored a number of books on the Anunnaki, and if you go online, there's perhaps a few thousand books on the Anunnaki. Besides Atlantis, the Anunnaki is one of the most written about subjects in world history. So if you do some research, there's tons of it out there. And for the most part, not all of it, but for the most part, most of the research overlaps and is very consistent between the different researchers.
Well, right, because most people just spin the same yarns that they've been told and influence it or give it their own shade, don't they? I mean, isn't that kind of how it works? I mean, this almost sounds like in the vein of what L. Ron Hubbard was trying to convey with Scientology. Do you find that there's cross-section of what Scientology is and what this belief system is?
No, not at all. No, not at all.
Okay, well, I mean, he was a science fiction writer who kind of wrote of these gods of the sky, that our place is really not from here, but more alien in nature. So that seems to fit kind of the same pattern.
Yeah, but I mean, if you really research L. Ron Hubbard, when you get to level 10 or whatever the final level is, everybody's driving around in vehicles from the 1950s. And that's just something completely different than Anunnaki research.
All right. But but my point was that, like Zachariah Stitchin kind of is one of the first guys to really promote this theory and belief system, and people have taken it from there, which is much like L. Ron Hubbard did with the idea and the ideals of Scientology, isn't it? That they created it, then people researched it from his findings, his research, his understanding of our place in the universe, and they continue to write and share their interpretations of the story as well.
Yeah, you could go there, but I mean, if you think about it, the Bible was written in Aramaic, and then it was translated into Latin, and then it was translated into Greek, and then it was translated into Roman, and then it was translated into other languages, and this was all done the compilation of the Bible actually started about 160 years after the death of Christ. So, everything is twisted, everything is hyperbolized, exaggerated to a certain extent. Is my research and all Anunnaki researchers' information completely accurate? Is it all based on perhaps some incorrect information? I would have to absolutely say yes, because nothing is completely correct.
Well, then how do you start to look at that information and ascertain what the real information is? Because, some people can say with complete conviction and belief in their heart and soul one thing and believe by that one thing wholeheartedly. How do you differentiate between, well, that's just not real? That's the part that's wrong.
Well, one thing that people need to come to terms with is that there's over 100 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy.
Uh-huh.
So for us to think that we are the only planet.
Oh, no, and I don't think most people believe that. I think people are very open to the idea and believe in the fact that there's more out there. It would be ridiculous to have this ever-expanding universe and there's only one little marble that holds life. That makes absolutely no sense. So the idea that there are other races and aliens out there is certainly I don't think there's really anybody out there that wouldn't at least concede to the idea that that's a possibility. But the fact of quoting and saying that this research, this is where we get this information from, if push comes to shove, where did Zachariah Stitchin get this information?
From translating cuneiform texts. So he researched it for over a decade before he started to release his books. For example, the 12th Planet back in 1974. So he didn't just stumble into this information, and it took him years just to be able to learn how to translate the cuneiform text. And there was a lot of researchers that will debate that he didn't translate them correctly, completely correctly. And I would have to agree, nobody can exactly translate those cuneiform texts perfectly.
Right. And where did those texts come from?
I'm sorry, Dave, go ahead.
Where did those texts come from? Where did he find those that he began breaking them down to read them and try to understand and make some semblance of sense of them?
Well, Samaria or Iraq. And then the iconography will tell the story without the spoken word. You see the Anunnaki gods on the monuments. You see them, on each side flanking a disc. The disc has wings on it. What else could a disc with wings represent? So, and in the end, let's say a lot of his research is incorrect.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, the most important thing is that the Anunnaki were on Earth, whether they colonized the whole Earth or not, whether the Bible is based on the Anunnaki or not. I do believe that the core of truth that he's trying to convey is actually correct, that some alien species came from another world and inhabited our planet and, in effect, called themselves the gods, and we worship them as if they were gods.
Okay. Could it be that what they stumbled upon was science fiction of its time, of forward thinkers, of L. Ron Hubbards and Isaac Asimovs and Rod Serlings of their time, that these were flights of fancy and things that they put down in the way that they would convey stories? much like, we as parents will make up stories to entertain our children. How do we know that they're just not finding a book of nursery rhymes or a nursery, Mother Goose stories from a different bygone era as opposed to reality?
Well, if you think about it, all cultures have similar stories.
Uh-huh.
All cultures.
Sure.
So did they all make it up too? Is there cross-pollination between, the Anunnaki in Iraq versus the Indian gods in India versus the gods in South America, including Pachacutec and Viracocha, versus the Egyptian gods, Isis, Osiris, Horus, Set. The stories are all too similar for them to, I think, just dream it up without any cross-pollination, at least according to mainstream archaeologists.
All right, we need to take a break. We'll come back. Our guest, Reverend John Polk, when we return to Darkness Radio. Now, you channel Yahweh, is that correct?
Among others, but yes.
Okay. When you channel like that, how do you begin, and how do you understand where the information is coming from?
Well, okay, it happens usually one of two ways. I either try to make it happen or it just comes to me. And a lot of what happens, it just comes to me. And what I do is I share my what you could call downloads with Anunnaki experts like Dr. Sasha and Janet Lesson, my editor and publicist, Karen Christine Patrick, other researchers and authors in the field that basically make a living off of this. And the best source of information I'm starting to get to know really well is Michael Lee Hill. And he's a direct Anunnaki contact, as are everybody that I just talked about.
When did you begin channeling these beings?
Really since I was a child, but I didn't honestly understand what was happening and able to identify the source until I was in my late 30s. So back around 2009, that's when it really started to become clear to me that there was some kind of intelligence behind the information that I was receiving. Prior to that, I just thought that I was coming up with this stuff myself. But some of the information that I was getting, and I would share it with other researchers, and they would tell me, well, other channels are receiving very similar information. So, of course, you always want to cross-reference anything that you receive by way of a download with others that are more established than you are. And I definitely did that. And so, if I try and meditate and receive information, I can do that. But some of the most valuable information, it just comes to me.
And again, how do you differentiate it between a vividly imaginative experience or imagination and a reality that this is, I get flashes and thoughts often. Does that mean that do you believe that in a sense that I am channeling something of a greater mind that's telling me this information?
All humans, believe it or not, and this is very hard for a lot of people to understand, but all humans receive information from the other side, whether it's a sentient being or whether it's an angel of some sort. But all of us do it. If we think that we don't, then we're really being very myopic about it. Is that not all thoughts that are in our mind are generated by our own brain. A lot of thoughts that we receive are thoughts that we've received telepathically from something else, some other kind of intelligently guided message to us. And, it's a basic tenet of metaphysics also.
The information that you channel, what type of information do they give you? Something that is certifiable, that you can go back and find documented proof that this is true, or something that comes true for you so that you have some kind of backing towards what you're experiencing and what the information is that you're getting?
Well, like I said, I can cross-reference it with other people, but one thing I'm big on doing is not doing a whole lot of of reading of other people's work to formulate my own ideas. A lot of what I do is receive this information and then run it by some certain individuals who I've named already, who do all the research all the time anyway. And they're like, well, that's what so-and-so is saying. And, they have five, 6 books about this exact kind of.
Then how do we know this isn't just global consciousness? It's an awakening. If 100 people have the same thought, that it's not just uploaded to the cosmic internet and all you're picking up on is that, not necessarily a truth of the universe, but a truth of man's concept of the universe.
It's possible. One thing that you did touch on, which I totally acknowledge, I'm not special and I'm not unique. This information is being received by people all around the world. So, for me to think or to say that I'm the only one receiving it, that would be weak and be headstrong. So, no, I've never come out and said that I'm the only one who's receiving this information. Like I said, I was cross-reference what I receive with other individuals to see if they think I'm right or wrong. And I value their judgment. But the big Anunnaki contactees on this planet that I've opened dialogue with, they all, for the very most part, agree with 95+% of everything that I tell them.
Right, but they're already of the like mind, right? I mean, aren't they already? This is a concept that they are believing in. So and again, I'm not trying to put you down, Reverend. It's just I'm trying to make sense of it for our listeners too, because I know there's a skeptical nature to what we talk about on the show, and like you, I don't just take things at face value that because it was said, this is what I believe. I question my faith and belief in religion and Christianity all the time.
Well, and you should.
Right. And I should question this as well, because this, all these dogmas, these ideologies that people create, we want to believe in something. Maybe there's nothing. Maybe the fact is, John, that there is nothing. We just are here and we live and we die, and that's the end of the story. But because we need laws and we need rules, and they learn that early on, that without some kind of parameters, we're a lost race, and even in the Bible, for God's sakes, they followed Moses into the desert and are willing to go 40 years. He goes up a mountain for a couple of days. They lose their mind and make a new god, a golden calf to pray to. People just seem like lemmings that are willing to believe anything as long as it gives them something to transcend the belief that we are all there is.
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. And when Moses came back down from Mount Sinai, he was given the instructions how to build the Ark of the Covenant. Mm-hmm. And then also contained within the Ark of the Covenant was the manna machine. So they lived off of basically a nuclear-driven device that could create food. Now, God gave Moses a device that can create food. If God was really God, would he need technology to create food, or could he just make it materialize? That's another point of argumentation in the Bible. The whole Moses story is really fascinating to me.
But then that follows into the same parable of give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. Teach a man to fish, and he'll eat for life. So isn't it the fact that you give them a machine, then it's not something, hey, I'm God, I've got much more important things to do than keep making manna fall from the sky. Here's how you can do it. Here's a machine to do it. And this will be what changes you.
And it's funny also. The whole Ark of the Covenant story is very curious also. The high priests would have to inhale frankincense, which is basically getting high. So the high priest would basically get high to communicate with God through the Ark of the Covenant. Now, that doesn't make sense either. You got to get high to talk to God. The high priests got to get high to talk to God. Plus, they drank wine all day long. Okay, so they drank wine and then got high to talk to God through a technological device. That's extraterrestrial. That cannot be God. Why does God require a technological telephone, if you will, that you have to be high to communicate with him in the first place? Also, it was known to strike people down all the time. So they would go into this tent, basically, so that nobody could see the Ark of the Covenant. And they would have a rope tied around their leg in case they got struck down by this thing. And it struck down at least 25%, at least according to the Bible, about 1 in 4 high priests that would go and try and communicate with God through the Ark of the Covenant would end up dead. And that's why they tied the rope around their legs so they could pull them out away from the Ark of the Covenant. Just the Bible just doesn't make a whole lot of sense unless you change some key words.
All right, let's take our final break this hour. We'll come back and continue to examine this concept right after this. And when you are channeling these energies, does it come through you in times of unconsciousness? Do you ever wake up to find like a tablet filled with notes and paperwork or something that you've done? What do you, does any of this still surprise you?
Really all of the above, Dave. Often it will hit me when I'm not thinking about it. I'm kind of just sitting there not thinking about anything. I like to, when I'm not working, I love to work. I love to watch sports. But when I'm not doing that, or even when I am watching sports, I'm not really watching it. It's kind of just like something in the background to occupy my senses. And then that's when these downloads will just enter my brain, and then I just write everything down. And I think all of us should have some kind of journal, whether we want to try and publish books or not. I think it's near and dear to all of us to write down things that I feel inspirational to us, things that just pop in our head that, maybe we question, was that my thought or was that from some other divine source? All of the above versus me actually trying to make things happen also. All of the above. All these things come to me in all shapes, forms, and fashions.
What kind of activities have you had to support your research? Have you encountered aliens?
I have. I absolutely have on multiple occasions. But that's one of those statements that, you really stick your neck out there and face a lot of ridicule unless you have witnesses. Well, at a UFO conference, there was over 20 witnesses to ETs that showed up at this UFO conference in which I was actually the opening speaker.
Say that again. There was an actual ET that showed up, and people were able to see and witness this. Yes,
absolutely. Mm-hmm.
All right. People. Is there photographic or video evidence to support any of this, or was it just everybody was so blown away that the Blue Meanie was there in your presence? Nobody bothered to record or videotape it.
How about this? A number of us tried to, and we were placed under some kind of what I call alien anesthesia, basically in a state of paralysis where a number of us blacked out. And a number of us were just basically frozen in our tracks, including one of the key witnesses who was actually the videographer who had a $5,000 digital camera in his hand. And we've talked about this on multiple shows. I've been on multiple shows talking about this with multiple witnesses with me on these shows talking about what happened to all of us. And it's something like that will just change your life completely forever. To the point where I had to write a book about it, and it's selling like hotcakes.
So what was the appearance? Why would they show up to an alien conference? What was the end game for them?
To me, I think it's baby steps towards disclosure, or what we could call soft disclosure. The disclosure is definitely inevitable. When is it going to happen? Well, that's the zillion-dollar question of the universe. Nobody can be sure. A lot of people, a lot of prognosticators, so-called prophets, and actually very, very proven, very accurate psychics have been wrong about when this date is actually going to arrive. But I believe that it steps towards soft disclosure. And then there's other UFO conferences where things like this have happened that is not getting really any media attention, and that's really a travesty. Because what happened at the conference in which I attended, things like this have been happening around the world. It's not getting any attention on purpose because mainstream media, they're not allowed to carry these kind of stories. And I understand six ruling class families.
I don't know that. There's a lot of major media outlets that cover UFO related stories. As a matter of fact, CNN and MSN and MSNBC just had an article over the last few days about NASA believing that there is alien life out there. I mean, so the mainstream media picks up on it if it's from a legitimate source.
But what I'm saying, they're not covering these actual events where there was witnesses and talking about not just UFOs.
Well, in all honesty, did you and your peers go to the media and tell them what occurred, or did you just talk about it amongst yourselves and release the information?
I've tried, and I've been straight up told that they can't, certain individuals, I will leave nameless, they just can't cover. They're not allowed to. So, I mean, that's that. Kind of like Pizzagate, which I don't like to talk about in any way whatsoever. But a lot of news sources just will not touch it.
All right, we have to take our top of the hour break. We'll come back and discuss this more in the next hour and discuss some of the other accounts and stories that our guest has collected. Reverend John Marcus Polk, our guest here. And remember, during the break, go check out podcast1.com and subscribe now to Beyond the Darkness, our new 1 hour weekly extension of the best in paranormal talk radio. Beyond the Darkness, released every Monday on Podcast One. You can't find it on Twin Cities News Talk. You can't find it at Darkness Radio, but you can find it at podcast1.com and iTunes. Seek out Beyond the Darkness. You'll find our podcast and be able to follow us along as we continue to go down the wormhole that is the world around us. We'll be back with more right after this. Darkness Radio. I'm Dave. That's Tim. And our guest, Reverend John Marcus Polk, is here talking to us about his two books, Yahweh, the Biblical God is an Alien, and his new book, Blue Beings, Visitation at the UFO Conference. We talked about this visitation. Take us back. This was an evening of Saturday, August 29th, 2015, at the Experiencers Speak Conference at the Fireside Inn in Portland, Maine. How did this moment go down? How did it play out?
Okay, so Audrey Starborn Hewins, she's been on television quite a bit, telling of her abduction stories. Her and her twin sister, Debbie, basically have been abductees since they were 5 years old. And anyway, Audrey put together what you call Starborn Support International. And what it is, it's a nonprofit organization, and I'm a part of it as well, that they talk to, and I in the past have talked to, abductees or what you could call experiencers. And we're not counselors. We are there basically to listen and let them know that they're not alone and that they're not crazy, and just try and talk them through what they're going through. And anyway, but her and her family put on these conferences every year. And that particular one, year and a half ago almost, she asked me if I would be the opening speaker. And she asked me if I'd be the opening speaker because she knew that I would take a spiritual approach to it in my presentation. And I did. So the best part for me, as a medium, as somebody that conducts guided meditation, I knew I could tap into the energy of these experiencers. So the first day there were 79 experiencers in this room. And let's say out of 79, probably 70 were experiencers. And let's more clearly define what an experiencer is. Somebody who's at least seen a UFO, had some kind of ET and or paranormal contact. And then there's individuals that aren't experiencers at all, that are more MUFON scientists. But for the most part, it's experiencers. So I had everybody hold hands. I conduct a guided meditation where I clear the room. I do a protection protocol of God's light surrounding each one of us individually, and then a big circle of God's light surrounding all of us collectively. Clear all the lower energy out of the room. Do a chimney sweep of our chakras, and then create a social, supernatural milieu within the room, which is conducive to luring and summoning angels. And so I do that, and I say, now that we are protected, I'm going to invite some angels to join us, more specifically Enoch, Raphael, Gabriel, and Michael, who are all mentioned in the Bible. And I said, my intention and my goal before the end of this conference, somebody's going to achieve some form of contact for the first time, and or somebody that walks in multiple worlds like I do will achieve contact unlike ever before. And so, so I'm putting my neck out there, and the first day, nothing happens. The second day, the whole conference is almost over with the exception of Travis Walton. And he's about to show his new DVD entitled Travis, and then do a question and answer period for about 45 minutes to wrap up the whole conference. So right as right before the DVD is about to be played, the lights are dimmed because we're going to be watching basically a movie, and these four beings come to the door, and they walk up to me, and they got money in their hand. Now imagine this, imagine you have a Bible in your hand. You have one half of the Bible with it open in your left hand with your palm open, and the other half of the Bible in your right palm. That's the way they were holding the money. The money was just kind of laying in their hands, and they come up to me and they say, "Are you the one that we pay to see Travis?" And I'm like, no. Let me go find Audrey. I find Audrey's twin sister, Debbie, who in turn takes them over to Audrey. So it's like I said, it's a little dark in the room, and at this point, I don't realize who I was even talking to. And so Audrey pulls them into the lights. She can get a better look at the money, and they didn't understand the concept of money. They didn't understand what they had in their hand. So, and Audrey's kind of going, she couldn't believe that these people didn't understand what money was, how much money they had in their hand. And she said, "Here, if you give me 4 of these, I'll let all 4 of you in." But then that's when she noticed that 2 of the 4 had blue skin. And so now she's taken a real scientific, critical eye to see, is there paint gathering on their hair follicles? Is paint cracking in the facial lines in their faces? And she's looking for these telltale signs of paint, and she cannot see it. She's trying to look for it. She's trying to see if there's some kind of logical explanation for it. And in the end, she determined that they clearly had blue skin. For whatever reason, they had blue skin. So then after she finally clears up the money thing, and it's funny, they didn't even have enough money, but she let them in anyway. And so then they walk up to Travis, and there's 4 of them, so let me describe what they look like. Let's call the leader Don. That's the name that he gave. And he said, "Call me Don because you're not going to be able to pronounce my real name." He was probably about 5'9", 170 pounds, had a low brimmed hat, curiously low over his eyes, script glasses, flannel shirt, jeans, and white sneakers. He was one of the 2 blue beings. The other one, there was 2 out of the 4 had blue skin. The other one was tall, thin, blonde hair, parted on the side. He had blue skin also. The other 2, one was about 5 foot tall. He was bald. He was wearing tight-fitting sunglasses. He had no hair on his head or his face except for a Fu Manchu that extended down, kind of like the Egyptian ones in their old statues, about 5 or 6 inches straight down, and white sleeveless T-shirt, jeans, and moccasins. Kind of looked like he was trying to be a biker or something. And then the 4th one was probably 6'1" or so, had dark hair, was wearing kind of like athletic clothes, T-shirt, shorts, and sneakers. And this particular one I got a very good look at, and he had black eyes. His eyes were huge, huge eye orbits, no color in his eyes, just black eyes. So that's a description of the 4, 2 of which had the blue skin. So anyway, they go over and they start talking to Travis Walton, the most famous abductee pretty much in world history. And they said, "We came here to see you." And Travis said, "Well, how are you enjoying the conference?" They said, "Well, we just got here." And then they started picking up his books, started picking up his DVDs, and just some small talk. He didn't talk to them a whole lot. And then at some juncture, shortly after that, they go and sit down. Now, here, this is very interesting because after that happened, Audrey and Travis Walton both concluded that 2 of these 4 beings had blue skin, that they were clearly people with blue skin. Anyway, so then they go and sit down, and they sit down pretty much right in front of me. And they're watching the DVD. They listen through the question and answer sequence that went on for perhaps 45 minutes after the conference or during the end of the conference. And then as soon as the conference was over, they walked up to me. So at this point, there's 79 people on the first day, probably 150 some odd people on the second day. And this makes it full moon, August 29th, 2015. And the apparent leader, who once again used the name Don, he said to me, he walks up to me and says, "See the tall one with the black eyes?" And I didn't get a good look at his eyes at that point. He said, "That's my son." And he used to be with his stepfather, and the stepfather was drugging him. But now he's in my custody, and I love my son, and I'm nurturing him back to health. So I was congratulating him on having his son back in his life, nurturing his son back to health. And some small talk after that. And then he starts asking me about my book, Yahweh, the Biblical God is an Alien. Now, mind you, it did not soak into my mind yet that this guy had blue skin. The lights were still dimmed, and the whole thing caught me off guard. And I believe that's when they did the Jedi mind trick on me pretty much the second that they walked in the door, as I was the first person that they actually talked to, period, at the conference. And so then I'm telling him about my book. I put it in his hand. And right around this time, I start to realize, oh my God, am I seeing what I think I'm seeing? That this guy and the guy next to him have blue skin. I start to really get a good look at his face. His hat was pulled curiously low over his eyebrows crown, covering his eyes. In effect, a shadow from the bill of his hat over his face. But it's slowly starting to sink in. And around this time, a number of other people attending the conference started to surround us and started asking him questions. And he was the only one talking at this point. So I can remember when I'm looking at him and he's looking at me, and it starts to dawn on me very slowly that, oh my God, this guy has blue pigment in his skin. And so now I realize I have my phone in my hand, and I'm going to just turn a quarter turn. Mind you, he stood next to me the entire time that we're having this conversation and when all the witnesses started to surround us. I'm about to get my phone and just take a picture of him multiple times without asking. And right when I was about to do that, the one that had the black eyes deliberately walks in front of my table. I had a table because I was selling books at the conference, and distracts me. And he looks at me, and I look at him, and I see that he does not have any color in his eyes. They're just two big black spheres, dispassionate, emotionless spheres in his eye orbits. It was too trippy weird. And he looks at me, I look at him. It dawns on me he's not a human being. And he goes, the Anunnaki, the Anunnaki, the Anunnaki, the Anunnaki, the Anunnaki, just like that, as if he was autistic, repeating himself over and over and over again. It was very strange. And after the fact, one of the key witnesses, the videographer, was named Ron Sharfie. I talked to him about this on multiple shows, and we talked about it on multiple shows, trying to figure out what it was. And he came to the conclusion that he thought it was perhaps a trigger mechanism to set off hypnosis, Jedi mind trick, the alien anesthesia on me so that I would not take a bunch of pictures of him. And then around that time, I kind of blacked out, and I was frozen pretty much in a state of paralysis standing up, which was just too trippy weird. I mean, I went from thinking in my mind, this guy's got blue skin, I'm about to take pictures of him on my phone without asking him. I was just going to do it, and then I froze. And so did Ron Sharfie, this other witness that was doing the videography. Then former Psychic of the Year in Canada, his name is R. Keith Andrews. I've been on a number of shows with him also talking about this. And he walks up, and he's a channel and medium also. And he asks Don if he's from the Pleiades. And Don says, yes. He said, I'm a shifter, and I'm a healer from the Pleiades. And then some other people start asking some questions, and then Keith and his wife are on either side of him, and his wife hugs him, and some other people are starting to ask him questions, and this is where I'm starting to black out. starting to not remember anything at this point. And I can see Don getting very loose, very comfortable, just too comfortable. And then the other blue being next to him starts to go, hey, we have to go, we have to go, we have to go. So they turned around and they left. And after they left, Keith Andrews said, do you realize that we just saw and met Pleiadians? And we all sat around and talked about it for hours. And it was a total trip. There's a lot more to it. But, if somebody wants to learn more about it, buy the book at johnpolkmedia.com. So that was the gist of it without going into too much more detail.
And just for the skeptic side, there is a disease called, and I know I'll botch it, so bear with me, methemoglobinemia is a blood disorder in which an abnormal amount of this methemoglobin, a form of hemoglobin, is produced according to the National Institutes for Health, and it gives people this, it's responsible for distributing the oxygen to the body, and without oxygen, of course, the heart, the brain, and everything will die. But in people with this, their skin will have a bluish tint or blue hue to it. As a matter of fact, there was a famous family, the blue-skinned people of Kentucky, and I'm trying to remember the family's name.
The Fugettes.
Right, and they were known for having blue skin. So there is medical conditions that can cause this situation as well. And there are the black contact lenses, the sclera contact lenses. Are you sure you might not just have been getting a little goofed by some people that were in the area and thought it'd be fun to kind of, run the ride on you?
That's a very good question. There's also colloidal silver.
Right. Colloidal silver, you can overdose on that and turn blue, right?
Yeah. So, I entertain that whole idea, but here's something to bear in mind. Audrey, who runs the conference, she's been on television multiple times. She blacked out. She forgot until the next day what happened. Now, how does that happen? Her whole life is based on extraterrestrials. Her whole life is based on Star Wars International. Her whole life is based on this kind of research. Her whole life, how could she possibly forget unless some advanced being did the Jedi mind trick on her and pretty much everybody else that came in contact or at least saw these beings. So I understand the scientific side of it. I do talk about that at length in my book.
And she remembers the next day?
She only remembered the next day.
Right. And don't you think, though, in a situation like that where you're so involved and so wrapped up in an environment and belief system like this, that when you're confronted with the possibility, maybe there's this disassociation. I've had real surreal moments where I've stood there talking to, give you a perfect example, meeting Christopher Lutz from the Amityville horror case. I grew up reading the books and hearing the stories and watching the show. And then here I become friends with this guy. And I remember the first conversation with him on stage when we did this panel. And I felt like I was thrown out of my body during this panel, watching it from a different angle, because it was such this strange disassociative feeling to the surreal nature of what I was doing. And could it be that is the case? I go up on stage all the time, and because I have a slight case of social anxiety, I will go up, and Tim can attest to this, and do a talk or a presentation or an auction and come off and have absolutely no memory of what just happened or how the crowd responded to it. It won't come back to me till a few days later when I'm out of that stressed flight or fight moment. I again, not trying to poo-poo on all of these ideas, but if she was one of a few that had this moment, I would say, that might have been something more of a shock because she was actually believing she was experiencing this moment with aliens. That would be enough to throw anybody a loop.
In the end, what happened did happen. Most of the witnesses will tell you that something happened to their ability to have just basic memory recall.
Okay. How did Travis respond to this when it was all said and done?
I'm sorry, say that again?
How did Travis Walton respond after all of this?
Okay, well, this is the messed up part.
Right.
Okay, is that he will not touch this with a 10-foot pole. But and I'm glad you brought that up also, what I just told you about Travis's interaction with them all comes from Audrey. I personally did not witness anything. And the reason that I couldn't see anything is because the room was set up in an L, okay? If you're at one end of the L, you cannot see the other end of the L. And the other end of the L from where I was, I did not have an eye shot of what was going on. I do believe that I understand why he doesn't want to talk about it. What he went through, the scrutiny and the threats and, the public ridicule, the police harassing him, the harassment of his family. I'm convinced that he just doesn't want to talk about it, period. But he's in a relationship now with Audrey, and Audrey has been outspoken about it and uses his name and talks about the whole interaction that took place between Travis and the Bluebings. So
that's just so interesting. Yeah, I've known Travis for a number of years, and he's usually pretty forthcoming when he has weird experiences.
Yeah, so somebody close to me ran into him at I believe it was Roswell. They have a UFO conference every year,
right?
And this individual talked to him about everything except that, and he was very, he's a cool guy, and he'll sit there and he'll talk to you. He'll take pictures with you. I got pictures with him. And he's a good person. He's a good human being, easy to talk to, and open to people asking him questions, and he should be. But when my friend, flipped the script on him after about 10 minutes of conversation and brought up the Bluebings, he did not talk to her the rest of the conference, and they were also at the same table. So that could be interpreted a number of ways. The way I interpret it is that the whole story is completely true and that he just didn't want to talk about it. And I do understand why. I completely respect him for not talking about it. And, I'll never put him in a situation to have to talk about it. Although Audrey has, she's dating him, and she and I went on, and I'll leave the shows nameless unless you want me to just talk about what those shows were and who the hosts were. But we went on, and not just me, but a number of the other witnesses have talked about this on multiple shows for, about a year and a half now. And, we're not coming off of our statements or what happened, that's for sure.
To have this experience, have the meeting with these beings, to what end? Again, you said you thought this was to open up disclosure, but if they're trying to mind screw you and erase the memory, how is that helping with the possibility of disclosure? What was the real meat of the message that they had to give to you?
Well, actually, all of us remembered it, but at the time when we were all ready to take out our cameras is when we blacked out. So none of us completely forgot. We all forgot at the time. And, I'm an alien abductee, and unless you are one, it's hard to explain to somebody. They'll just really never get it. And if they're not open-minded to it, believe it or not, I understand. What can you prove scientifically? In a court of law, it doesn't really matter what the truth is. It's what can you prove. And I can prove it to myself. The other witnesses that I've talked about, we all know what happened. And really, we don't really care if people believe us or not. But they want to talk about it. They want to argue about it. I'm totally open to discuss it. Anybody wants to challenge me on this, I'm more than happy to talk to them about it, even if they lambaste me on their own show. It's fine. This information needs to come out. Mm-hmm. Too many people saw this. Too many people saw these individuals. Too many people can attest to what I came up with the term in my first book, alien anesthesia, or you could use the term Jedi mind trick. They absolutely did it. And this is interesting also, is during the recording of only Travis's presentation. So figure they were only there for Travis's presentation. They weren't there for mine. They weren't there for anybody else's, at least physically, although they could have been in another dimension just vibrating at a higher frequency and we couldn't see them. It's still in the room. But during his presentation, even during the DVD, there was this wom, 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 wom kind of sound on the recording. And Ron Sharfie only discovered it after the fact when he went back and listened to it. None of the other speakers had that weird ambient kind of tone. And these tones are very, very indicative of alien abduction. I've talked to a number of hypnotists about this, especially hypnotists that deal not exclusively, but work with experiencers and alien abductees, that often they will do the verbal with you to put you in that mental state, but then they'll sound a tone, and this tone triggers something in your mind to enable the hypnotic effect to sink in even deeper. And to me, that's what that tone was, but it was like you'd have to have dog ears to hear it. It was not audible to a human ear, but it was audible on the recording, which I found interesting. And Ron and I had talked about it, and we came to the conclusion that probably had something to do with the hypnotic effect that was placed on all of us witnesses.
All right, let's take a break. We'll come back and continue talking about some of the other experiences right after this. All right, we've talked about the blue beings. Talk to me about some of these other points you'd sent in. The aliens on the balcony. What is that story?
That goes back to when I was a kid. I was 15 years old, and I was telling you earlier, I grew up in a $1 million condo on the ocean, and it was just an incredible place and way to grow up. On the beach, spring break, MTV, Days of Thunder with Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, and that was all going on when I lived there, which was a great time to be alive. But anyway, it was not uncommon to see the moon reflecting off of the ocean. So the rolling tide of the Atlantic kind of was a soothing lullaby for me every night to go to sleep. You could hear it gently crashing. And then this one night, I look out, and this is not the moon. Number one, it's too low. I can see it moving towards the condominium. So it's clearly not the moon. And within a few seconds after I really, really could identify that this object that looked like the moon, but it didn't, the more it got closer to me, it had like shards of light coming out of it instead of it being, one of the phases of the moon. I see three grays on the balcony. And the balcony, mind you, across the whole house was mostly sliding glass doors before you got into or out of the balcony into the house. And I see these three grays on the balcony, and they're pushing their heads up against the glass, almost like kids in a zoo looking at a lion or something. And then the next thing I know, they're inside my room, and figure my bed was 3.5 something feet tall. And these grays, their heads were popping up just over the bed. So figure they may have been 4 foot. Your typical gray, diminutive, rudimentary nose, mouth, ears, big black wraparound eyes, big bulbous heads, very thin, spindly, diminutive bodies. And the next thing I know, I make eye contact with one of them, and then I black out. I don't remember anything after that. And then the next thing I know, I wake up in my bed. It's the next morning. I don't even remember blacking out. I don't remember anything. All I do remember is just waking up. But I do remember what I saw. And, I'd start to move around, and then I have incredible discomfort in my front genitalia, if you will, and in my backside, which is very common. It was written quite a bit by Whitley Strieber, or Whitley Strieber, however you pronounce his name, heard it pronounced both ways in his book Communion. And I've actually talked to him about the blue beams also, because he's had a similar experience, but that's another story. And so at this point, that's when you really have to re-examine what happened to you. You try to make logic out of what happened to you. And to be honest with you, a couple days later, the pain went away, and it did take a couple days. And I just wrote it off as a dream. And when I was in my late 30s, when I started getting into Reiki, which we discussed earlier at the beginning of the show, into metaphysics, that's when these latent memories started to unearth themselves from my subconscious into my conscious mind. And I started to get little freeze frames of what happened, and then those freeze frames turned into a movie montage, which turned into a movie trailer, where it was almost like watching a 3-minute movie trailer of what happened. But that's what happened. That happened when I was 15 years old, and I know some other things that happened to me prior to being 15, but that's the most vivid thing that I can actually remember and describe to you.
Having experiences like this and having these aliens seek you out, do you have any reason to believe, and you said earlier, nothing special, there's nothing special about you. There must be, because aliens don't seek out Tim and I. They're not, we're not having these experiences. There has to be something about John Marcus Polk that stands out.
Astute observation, Dave. So what I believe, and I've been asked this question before, and I believe it's a question that should be addressed whenever I talk about this, is I've been able to see ghosts since I was a child. My mom would do the Ouija board with me, which I don't endorse. Don't even like the whole concept of Ouija board. But she did it when I was 5 years old. So, and I believe that opened the vortex into the spirit world for me. And, I've been able to see spirits since I was a child. And as I get older, it's happening more and more and more. I just had a good friend of mine, and this girl that he met stay at my house. And I told them both, my house is totally haunted. It's built on an old Indian reservation. And we had some incredible poltergeist experiences while they were here, more specifically with me and her as opposed to him. But I believe that that's a big reason, is that for whatever reason, I can see into these inter and extra dimensional realms. And when I say I can see angels, I don't necessarily see, flowing locks of hair, distinct facial features and eye color and things like that. I see more orbs. I see more bent light, almost like Predator. Remember how Predator would use the environment around it and bend the light as a form of camouflage. That's more of what I see. And I work with ghost hunters, and we can all sit there and see the same thing at the same time. There's mediums that are way better at it than I am. But one thing I'm very, very good at is locating them. I can locate them. And then there's other mediums that work with us that can actually talk to them directly. I can talk to them directly also, but I'm not as accurate as this one lady that works with us. I willingly just learn from her and listen to her of how she better communicates with them than I do. I'm still working on the accuracy thing. And what I've learned is that I'm such an open conduit that I'm receiving multiple feeds of information from multiple sources. And then that's why if I was going to give somebody a reading, I'm usually pretty accurate, but I'm not accurate enough where I'd feel confident charging somebody for it. So I believe that that's a quality about myself. And I don't like to say it's my gift. This is a gift that was lent to me for this lifetime to share with people and also to teach, because I can teach people how to do it. I think that's a big reason why, because they know I can see them. I can raise my vibration to a higher frequency and look into these extra-dimensional realms and dimensions that are literally right on top of us, but we just can't see them with the human naked eye because we vibrate in the third density. But when you learn how to traverse your body, mind, spirit, and vibrate in the fourth, fifth, and higher dimensions, you can see into these extra-dimensional realms that coexist with us, at all times, and we just don't know it.
Yeah, nothing special about you. Let's take a quick break. We'll come back with more right after this. Are back in town starting January 27th. The best illusion show, hands down, I've ever seen, and they've got a whole new slate of illusions and preparation ready for the Darkness Radio audience. Go to intriguetheater.com and get information on tickets. Sign up, be there. They're going to be, I think, 4 weekends in a row, Tim.
Yep.
Intrigue Theater back in the Twin Cities at the the Triune Temple over in St.
Paul, yeah.
Haunted Triune Temple.
Oh yeah.
And I'm not kidding you, folks. Last time we were there, the flipping walls were bleeding some kind of substance. When I politely asked one of the brothers, is that what you call them over at the Masonic Lodges, brothers?
No, we need to get racial.
One of the Masons, I said, what is happening? What is this? And he said, I don't know, we're looking into it. And he just turned around and walked away really quickly. But,
so let me get this straight. You asked a guy in a secret society to ask about something secret that was going on in the temple, just to come forward with
I don't know. Are they hiding, like, is that where they hide the Knights Templars' bodies in the wall to protect them and it's bleeding through?
I don't know what you're talking about, Dave.
So anyway, it's at a haunted temple. It's an amazing illusion show, which will challenge your perceptions of the paranormal. And what's really cool, we got him to admit on the show last night, he's caught some strange evidence while videotaping his rehearsals, and he's going to be putting that up soon. So go check out intriguetheater.com and sign up to get on the mailing list, also to check out for tickets. But go tag that page and make it a favorite, because as soon as that video comes out, you're going to want to see it.
Oh, yeah.
It's nuts. And I asked him, I said, Sean Paul, you're an illusionist. He goes, I know what you're thinking, Dave. He goes, this has nothing to do. That's why I didn't even want to do it. He's still fighting me. And I'm like, no, put it up. I want to see this. But Sean Paul and Juliana Fay will be back here in the Twin Cities, and they're going to be here for 4 weekends.
Don't forget about Frankie.
Yeah, Frankie the Monkey's back.
Yeah.
And that's going to be amazing, too. So intriguetheater.com. Check it out and join us. We'll be out there. All right, we're back with Reverend John Marcus Polk. How recently have you communicated with an alien race, and how many alien races have you contacted now?
Okay, so let's do one at a time. How many? I can't be exactly sure. One thing that they can do is they can shapeshift. So once you can see them, they can mask themselves as something different, which can give you the guise that you just encountered two different species of ET when, in effect, you may have only encountered one. So there's that question. It's impossible for me to answer and tell you, I've met the Dracos, I've met the Lemurians, the Arcturians, I can go on and on and on, which I've encountered a number of them, but I can't give you an exact number because I can't honestly tell you because I don't know. When was the last time? Just the other night. I have my own show, and I like to interview experiencers. And when I interview experiencers, my soul shifts a great deal. What I try to do, I try to communicate with the ETs that are communicating with them. So, for example, Adam Ambrose, I don't know if you've heard of him or know his story, but he's doing the rounds on all the big shows right now. And I interviewed him on my show and on a couple shows recently. And we remember us talking about the tone, or I brought up the tone. I asked him about these tones, and he said, yeah, absolutely. There's a direct correlation between these tones and the abduction scenario and or visitation. And so I interviewed him recently, and something was in my room. I hear this tone, the same tone that I heard while I was interviewing him on the radio show. And this tone, it just starts out of nowhere. I'm laying in my bed. I'm trying to sleep. I can't sleep. And I feel that something is in my room. I feel a presence, and I'm trying to open my eyes, and I can move my body. I can physically roll around in my bed, but whatever this was not allowing me to open my body. So now I got to pinch myself, scratch myself to make sure that I'm not dreaming. I was clearly not dreaming. And then the second the tone went away, my eyes were able to open. But when my friend from California was staying with me, there was something in my room. And I told him, I said, if you're going to start dating this girl who is an abductee herself, I said, when you get abductees around each other, the incidence of these beings making themselves present occurs at an exponentially greater clip. So
have you done like a regression to find out what they're doing to you in those moments when you don't remember, when you feel hypnotized?
I do. I did. Get this. Most of the regressions I have done have failed miserably, but one of them actually worked some. And what came to me are what we extracted from the regression itself was the Anunnaki. That was the one definitive answer that we could come up with. I would say the majority of the rest of it was pretty much a failure, that I was actually very coherent and lucid when she thought I was under. And at one point she did place me under, and she hates that term. A lot of them hate that term, but in effect, that's the best way to describe it. And and that part I don't remember, but she told me, and she recorded it also. I remembered most of what I heard on the recording, except maybe for this 5-minute chunk. And according to what came out of me, is that the Anunnaki are visiting me with some regularity, and that the blue beings at the conference were actually descendants of the Anunnaki.
All right. So they're giving you this information. Are they hinting at when they're going to come forward and when the alien races of the world are going to make themselves known to our planet?
That's a brilliant question. I've been pushing for that answer, and the definitive answer that I keep getting, Dave, is that no, we're not going to tell you. We're not going to tell you because we know you, John. You'll go blab and tell everybody. So, and you know what? They're right. If I thought I was right about it, I would tell everybody. I've got an idea of when I think it is, but and I'll tell you what I think. But I'm not going to. I'm not going to put money behind it, and go, this is definitive. This is when it's going to happen. But I believe it's going to happen before the conclusion of 2018.
By the conclusion of 2018, what brings you to that conclusion? Is there something specific that's tipped you that direction?
Yeah, I ran into a psychic medium at the Big Bear Lake Alien Snowfest in February of this year. His name was Chris Medina, and I had him on one of my shows, and we talked about it, and that was the answer that he came up with. And he didn't want to divulge the information either. He didn't feel 100% comfortable and confident saying it, but he said it, and that's the same information that I had been receiving, and a number of other, and I'm not going to call myself a psychic medium. There's a difference between psychic mediums and mediums, but a number of psychic mediums that are really good at it, that can do readings over the phone during a radio show, and they're accurate. They're telling me the same thing. So let's say we're all wrong. I do believe it will happen by the end of 2020, but I'm thinking it's going to happen in the next 2 years.
We literally have 2 minutes left. You can do angel and ET summonings. You do seances, something you can teach. Is that a good idea for people to try to engage them?
I only do it with select individuals. I meditate on whether I think that it's a good idea for that individual to receive that kind of training or not. And more often than not, I get a resounding no answer. And if I get a resounding no answer, I'm not even going to tell them how to do it. So, yeah, I mean, with this comes a great deal of responsibility. And I don't want to be careless, and I definitely don't want to get somebody hurt, because I've actually done that before. I've had somebody get basically attacked by, a dark entity before because I didn't know what I was doing, and that was a long time ago. So you live, you learn, and if you don't learn from your mistakes, then you just keep making them. So, very good question.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, John, and sharing your insights and your reality of what's going on in the world around us. Hopefully we'll find out by 2018 together what's going on and if they're willing to come forward.
Yeah, I concur. Very good interview questions. A lot of tough questions for me to answer, but they were all necessary. So good interview, Dave.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Again, no disrespect meant, but it's questions that I know our audience will be asking, and we need to know that, again, nothing can be taken at face value from any side of these stories. So That's why we're here, to try to ask those questions and get those answers, and we'll keep pushing. Thank you very much, Reverend John Marcus Polk. Well, that's it for us tonight, kids. We'll be back tomorrow and Saturday, because, damn it, I just can't get enough of these people, Tim.
That's what I hear.
Tomorrow with Darkness Radio, 9 to midnight. Saturday, New Year's Eve, Tim and I in studio, drinking champagne, getting drunk on the air. No, that's not going to happen.
No?
But we will be here doing predictions for 2017. And I predict it better be a damn better year than 2016.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are reminding me they've had better years.
Yes.
So 2016 is only bad for some people. That's it. Be safe, be kind, love one another, laugh tomorrow, love a lot, give some extra hugs, and we'll talk to you again here on the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Darkness Radio.